What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, I'm going to talk about the wildcard for Game Week 3. I'm not personally planning on activating the chip this week, although if a few more issues crop up, then maybe I will. But plenty of people have seen enough from Game Weeks 1 and 2, so I wanted to talk about the kind of draft that I would put together. I've got two in this video, a Salah-only draft and a Haaland-only one. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons for each of them. For anyone that's on the fence about wildcarding, that probably means you don't need it. We have only had 2 game weeks, right? There's plenty more information to come, plenty more chaos as well. The transfer window doesn't shut till this Friday. We've got an international break between game weeks 3 and 4 as well. If you can hold on until game weeks 4 or later, that is probably going to be better. But if you really do have just too many issues in your side, too many price drops, lots of players that you want to bring in that are rising in price, I'm not against wildcarding in 3, but most of you probably don't need it. Either way, if you're thinking about it or you have hit that button already, let's talk about the drafts. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Check out Fantasy Football Hub for 50% off at the moment as well. Otherwise, let's get into it. All right, let's start with the defensive options. Now, in goal, I've gone for the Brentford double-up of Flekken and Valdemarsson, so you can get both of their goalkeepers for 8.5. If something happens to Flekken, you know you've got Valdemarsson to step in straight away without having to make a transfer. I spoke about this combination quite a lot during pre-season. In the end, for my own team, I went for Henderson because I felt like Crystal Palace's short-term fixtures were better. But if you're wildcarding this early, you've got to be thinking longer term. And Brentford's fixtures are pretty good. So it's Southampton at home this week. In game weeks 4 and 5, it's not quite so good. They've got 2 away games. I'm just going to bring them up here, which is City away and Spurs away. So you wouldn't expect clean sheets. But the run of fixtures after that, West Ham at home, Wolves at home, Man United away, Ipswich at home, Fulham away, Bournemouth at home, Everton away, Leicester at home. It's really good for quite a while. And the fact that you can get both players for 8.5 is kind of nice. It would block you from having 2 other Brentford players, but I'm not sure that's something that's going to happen anytime soon. Keep an eye out on the transfer activity this week before the market closes on Friday, because if Tony stays, with the fixtures they've got, possibly at some point you might want a Tony and Mbeumo double up, but it's pretty easy to fix, right? You just go for a different 4 million defender. So Flekken is who I would probably go for on wildcard. If you were setting up your squad a little bit differently and you had a bit more money to spend, you could look at Martinez from Aston Villa instead, because you don't have those 2 away games against Spurs and Man City coming up. Their fixture run is Leicester away, Everton at home, Wolves at home, Ipswich away, United at home, Fulham away, Bournemouth at home, etc. The fixtures in the short term are definitely better, but you've got to spend 5 million. And I think even though cheap options are starting to emerge, like Smith Rowe, Rodgers in attack, etc., money is still quite tight, and I just couldn't find anywhere I really wanted to drop the 0.5 in this team to get Martinez. In terms of the defenders, I feel like you've got to have an Arsenal one. Fair enough if you didn't start with one in game week 1, but they got Brighton at home this week. And they, like Brentford, have then got 2, tough enough away games for clean sheets. It's Spurs away and City away in 4 and 5. But after that, it's Leicester at home, Southampton at home, Bournemouth away. They're great fixtures for clean sheets. So I feel like we've got to have an Arsenal defender. I've gone for Gabriel. We haven't seen enough games so far to know exactly what Arteta's long-term plan is going to be for the left-back position. Will it just be a rotation of Timber and Calafiori? Will Calafiori play left centre-back at some point? We don't know, right? It could happen. If you want to play it ultra-safe, you pick Saliba. Again, I wouldn't be able to find the 0.5 to go for Ben White. It's not that he's a terrible option. It's just all about money. Saliba is the absolute safe pick. And given what's happened so far in the first couple of game weeks, like players losing their place and stuff like that, maybe it is worth playing safe on such an early wild card. But if they're both going to keep starting, Gabriel is more of a threat from set pieces. So that's who I would go with. I've kept Pedro Porro in the team, although Newcastle away and Arsenal at home, next 2 fixtures are not ideal for clean sheets, but he's so attacking. And longer term, Spurs fixtures are still pretty good. So you got Brentford at home in game week 5. Okay, then it is another 2 away games against United and Brighton, but you've got other defenders you can play instead if you want to. And much longer term, West Ham at home in 8, Palace away 9, Villa at home 10, Ipswich at home 11, there's Fulham at home in 13, Southampton away in 16, Bournemouth away in 14. There's fixtures where he could pick up clean sheets and or attacking returns. I will say, still don't think the Spurs defence is going to be that great. And because you've got to play all of Arsenal, Newcastle, Man United and Brighton in the next 5 game weeks, you absolutely could put Porro down to a different player instead. Like, I don't know, Robinson from Fulham, for example. That would give you enough money to go from Flecken to Martinez. But I'm just not sure I'd be willing to drop Porro just yet. And also with the way I've set this squad up, I don't actually mind playing Porro in game week 3. Then I've got Konza at Leicester away. Villa fixture's really good, as I've just mentioned, with Martinez. 4.5, absolutely nailed on. Not an exciting pick, but can be relied upon for starts. And sometimes that's all you need. So he's in. I've got Van Dijk on the bench because after Man United away in game week 3, Liverpool's fixtures are pretty good again for clean sheets. We've already seen them pick up 2 in the first 2 game weeks. Forest at home in 4, Bournemouth at home in 5, Wolves and Palace away in 6 and 7, which is going to be a bit more difficult. And then after that, you've got Chelsea and Arsenal. So it's not like the fixture run is great for a long time, but in the short term, it's decent. And then you can maybe look to sell into someone else later on. Again, you've got the security of starts with Van Dijk, but the more exciting pick is probably Robertson. So instead of Gabriel and Van Dijk, it could be Gabriel and Robertson. If you want to play it ultra safe, it's Van Dijk and Saliba. Either way, for 6 million, that's probably the 2 that I would go for. An Arsenal and Liverpool defender. I'd love to have Trent, but again, money is quite tight with the way this draft has been built, so I can't fit him in. But if you wanted to go for Trent, he's obviously excellent as well. And then my 4 million defender is Mosquera from Wolves. Hopefully he will keep his place in the team. And the Wolves fixtures from game week 10 onwards are really good. And if he does keep playing, he's an option you can use later on. So that is a very long-term pick. You could go for Harwood Bellis if you wanted to. Greaves at Ipswich as well. They've got better fixtures in the short term. But long-term, Mosquera is pretty decent from Wolves. So for this wildcard draft, I've gone for Salah only. There's no space for Erling Haaland, but I'm going to show you a Haaland draft later on. You could put a pretty decent team together with both of them, or maybe even a team without either, but I prefer having just one or the other because you've always got that security of captaincy in particular. So if you're not happy about captaining someone else, you can fall back on Salah or Haaland. And if you put both of them into the team, there still just is, for me, too many sacrifices. Like, we have got a lot of cheap options this year. Rodgers at 5, Smith Rowe at 5.5, João Pedro up front at 5.5 as well. But longer term, and I think you've really got to think quite far in the future when you're wildcarding this early, are you confident that those players will keep getting minutes, or are they going to be issues later on? Like, I absolutely think that João Pedro could keep starting for Brighton, Smith Rowe for Fulham as well. Rodgers has played decently too. But I still don't like the amount of sacrifices that I have to make to have Salah and Haaland. So I've chosen one only. I've gone for Salah. Interestingly, Salah in 2 premium draft is what I first came up with on the day that FPL launched. And obviously it did really well in game week 1. Not quite so well in game week 2. But you've got past that Haaland Ipswich at home fixture now. So maybe there is more reason to take him on. But longer term, Man City's fixtures are pretty good. So you've got to have a really good think about captaincy to decide which way you want to go with your draft. Like for this one in particular, I'd probably captain Saka in game week 3. That sounded very West Country, didn't it? Saka in game week 3 against Brighton at home. And then you've got Salah ready for game weeks 4 and 5 against Forest at home and Bournemouth at home. I think that's okay to take Haaland on. But after that for Salah, you've got Wolves away, Palace away, Chelsea at home, Arsenal away. So it's not terrible, but it's not great either. And if you look at Haaland, he, from game week 6, has Newcastle away, Fulham at home, Wolves away, Southampton at home. So you've really got to be sure, if you're going for a Salah-only draft, that you're prepared to take Haaland on, or you have to pre-book transfers to bring him in later on, which is not necessarily the end of the world. It's just a lot to think about. Because going through game week 9, when Haaland's got Southampton at home and you don't have him, is kind of tricky. But, on the flip side, not having Haaland gives you an extra 2.5 to spend, and that makes your overall squad better. So, to get back onto the actual midfielders, Salah, obviously, just talked about him quite a lot. Saka's in there. I've mentioned him for captaincy this week. I've got Cole Palmer in there. Now, that is, I wouldn't even say that's a massive reaction to what happened last week. I just think if I was building a Salah-only draft, I would have 2 premium midfielders. And Son's about to run into Newcastle away and Arsenal at home. And Palmer's got a really good run of fixtures. So he is just the one I would go for at the moment. I probably would have started game week 1 with Son, but wildcard 3 with Palmer. And then the other 2 midfielders are Eze and Smith Rowe. I don't think I need to talk that highly of Smith Rowe to convince people to put him in. He's obviously done really well, got his goal in game week 2. It's Ipswich away, West Ham at home, Newcastle at home, Forest away next 4. He does look like one of the best 5.5s. You could go for someone like Minter at Brighton, who has Arsenal away this week, but 2 good home fixtures in 4 and 5. I'm just worried about the minutes for Brighton players, where I feel like Smith Rowe is probably a little bit more nailed on. And then I still think Eze is a really good pick, despite the fact he's blanked in the first 2 game weeks. The beauty of being on Wildcard, if you have activated it, you can not have Eze in your team, wait until he drops to 6.9 million, which will probably happen this week. And once that's happened, you can then put him into your team for a little bit cheaper to save yourself some money. I just think for 7 million, he still represents really good value despite the blanks. Chelsea away this week. They conceded quite a few chances to Wolves, and also 2 goals, of course. Leicester at home, Man United home, Everton away, Liverpool at home, Forest away. It's not an amazing run, but it's really not that bad for a player that's completely nailed on penalties and likes to shoot as well. He's been very unlucky not to have any returns so far. And I think for 7 million, he's decent. The other option at that price point is Mbeumo. If Tony goes, I really like Mbeumo because he'll be on penalties. And even though he's got Man City away in 4, he's obviously got Southampton at home this week. And from 5 onwards, it's Spurs away, West Ham at home, Wolves at home, Man United away, Ipswich at home, Fulham away, Bournemouth home. Incredible run. He always starts. And having penalties is just another thing in his locker if Tony goes. So I could absolutely see if you really just didn't want Eze, you could just put Mbeumo in instead. Ultimately, there's a lot of ways to build your wildcard still, which I think is good. There's a lot of obviously differently priced players. Everyone's got different preferences. You might hate this setup. You could even have Eze and Mbeumo. I'm not sure who I would drop to make that happen. Probably have to be a midfielder like Palmer or Saka. And I think long-term Saka is the one that I would want. But having Eze and Mbeumo, they're just both really good value. 7 million penalty takers that are nailed on and have great minutes. That's hard to come by in FPL. And so you could have both. It's one or the other. Right now at the time of recording, I think it'd have to be Eze because of the Tony situation. But you could make a case that Mbeumo is the slightly better long-term option if Tony goes. And then up front, I've gone for Ollie Watkins, basically in the Erling Haaland spot. And then alongside him, it's 2 5.5 million forwards, Adam Armstrong and João Pedro, who potentially represent really good value as long as they keep playing. Now, with Armstrong, I don't think there's really too much of a worry there. Southampton do have a few options, so you might see him get subbed early, as we saw in game week 2. But I'm pretty confident most weeks he will start, and he's on penalties. And with João Pedro, he's penalty taker as well. And so far, the minutes have been really good for the first couple of game weeks. I think João Pedro, longer term, is more at risk of either losing his place or just getting reduced minutes in general because Brighton just have so many options. But in theory, at 5.5, they are just ridiculous value. And it lets you have that Salah, Palmer and Saka midfield. Again, you could absolutely downgrade Palmer to like a 6.5, like a Gibbs White or a Bailey or someone like that if you wanted to. Maybe upgrade Smith Rowe to Mbeumo, upgrade Armstrong to like a Solanke or a Havertz or someone like that. But overall, I think that's a pretty solid setup. And look, just because you're having to think long term and not wanting to make transfers, it doesn't mean you can't make transfers. If Armstrong and João Pedro start looking dodgy as a combination, you could just downgrade one of Salah, Palmer or Saka later on and then fix it. But I think right now that looks pretty decent. With Watkins, I do have concerns about his minutes because he's come off on the 61st and 64th minute in the first 2 game weeks, but surely that will build up. I don't think anyone expects Watkins to keep coming off that early. It is worth saying, though, Champions League is going to start up after the international break. He may not be a 90-minute man anymore. It may be that Duran sees more game time, especially if he keeps doing well, and Watkins might come off on like the 75th, 80th minute, especially early on as he's building up that match fitness. So I think because of the fixtures, and because you're on wildcard, and obviously you can change whatever you want, it would seem a bit weird to not go for Watkins given how good the fixtures are. And it's not even a case that I'm done with Isak and I think he's a terrible option because he's not. But longer term, Newcastle's fixtures aren't as good. So Spurs at home, Wolves away, Fulham away, not bad. But then it's City at home, Everton away, Brighton at home, Chelsea away, Arsenal at home. That run from 6 to 10 is just not great. So I feel like you fix it now and you go for Aston Villa just because they got such good fixtures. So it's not a case that Isak's terrible. It's just a fixtures play, really. Or if you wanted to save a bit of money, you could go for Havertz and go for the Arsenal triple up, Gabriel or Saliba, plus Saka, plus Havertz. The fact that Jesus has already picked up a bit of an injury means Havertz at number 9 minutes are pretty much secure. Like Trossard could play there, of course, but I think it's Havertz's spot, basically. And he's a great option for that money. He's gone up to 8.1 million. The only thing with triple Arsenal is they've got to play City away soon, which is not ideal. But again, you have to think into the future, and Arsenal's fixtures in 6 and 7 are so good, you've got to kind of put them in now. So Havertz instead of Watkins, then $1 million to spend elsewhere could also work. But overall, I think that looks pretty good. I mean, if I'm thinking back to my Game Week 1 squad where I went for a few minutes risk, I'm looking through this team. Okay, maybe Gabriel long-term is a slight risk. You could just go for Saliba. But Porro, Konza, Flecken, Salah, Palmer, Saka, Eze, Smith-Rowe, Watkins, even Armstrong, they're pretty much first choice. Maybe it won't end up like that with Smith-Rowe because we don't have any data to go on with him at Fulham, of course, from previous seasons. But most of us expect him to play. João Pedro may be a slight concern, but he's great value. Van Dijk absolutely nailed. And Mosquera possibly a little bit of an issue at Wolves longer term. But he's looking good right now. And he's only 4 million. So I don't see a huge amount of issues in here. Obviously, they can crop up, right? Injuries and suspensions can happen. But I think you're pretty safe for minutes in the short term. That's going to allow you to build up transfers and then make them down the line if you need to. Let me know in the comments below what you would change about this team, and let's take a look at a Haaland draft as well. So with the Haaland only draft, I really struggled to decide where to make the sacrifices to fit him in. I think with a Salah only draft, if you're happy with João Pedro and Adam Armstrong up front as part of a rotation, the rest of it almost picks itself. Not entirely, there's still plenty of decisions to be made, but it's a bit easier. With Haaland, I struggled a bit more, and this is what I came up with. So I've still got Flecken in goal, and Gabriel, Konza, Van Dijk and Mosquera in defence. I've taken out Pedro Porro and put in Robinson from Fulham instead. Hopefully with the signings that Fulham have made, they'll become a bit of a better defensively sound team. Right? I don't expect their defence to be amazing all of a sudden, but maybe it can get a little bit better, and Robinson's pretty attacking as well. So he's in to save the money over Porro. Then in midfield, I've still got Palmer, Saka and Smith-Rowe, but I've taken out Eze and Salah and put in Rodgers and Gibbs-White. Now, I'm not particularly happy with the Gibbs-White pick. I feel like some way you've got to find 0.5 million to get Eze or Mbeumo. But if you're going to go safe in terms of minutes and you're happy with the rest of the structure, Gibbs-White probably is the best 6.5. You could go for someone like Leon Bailey at Aston Villa instead, but that would block you from having Watkins at some point because I've got Rodgers and Konza in this team still. Gibbs-White just doesn't excite me at all. To me, he almost feels like a cheaper Bruno Fernandes, right? He's not massively attacking from open play. There's some threat there. I mean, Fernandes is better, but that's what you pay more for. You're really relying on the fact that he always plays and has penalties. But just with the way I've set this squad up, that's the only way I could do it, is to have Gibbs-White in there. Then Haaland up front, João Pedro is still on the bench. And then instead of Adam Armstrong, I've gone for Havertz. So I've got that third Arsenal player ready for their good fixtures from Game Week 6 onwards. And obviously Brighton at home, and even Spurs away next week in Game Week 4 for attackers is not that bad. So I don't mind having both Havertz and Saka. And I think overall that looks pretty good. But even when I'm looking at it now, I'm thinking I've got to take Havertz out for someone 7.5 or below and do Gibbs-White to Eze or Mbeumo. And I think that's a better overall side. The problem with 7.5 or below forwards, there's lots of options, but I'm not sure I can... There's not one that stands out to me as the obvious one to go for. Solanke, possibly. He might not even be fit for Game Week 3. It's Newcastle away, Arsenal at home. Nicholas Jackson for Chelsea. Scored in Game Week 2. Good fixtures to come. You could double up with Palmer in attack. Could Nkunku or João Felix or someone like that start number 9 instead? Will they buy someone this week? Possibly. Mateta, I feel like he's a bit overpriced, but I don't hate it. Muniz, possibly, at 6.1 is an option. Or you just go back down to Adam Armstrong, and then all of a sudden you've got kind of 2.5 million to spend elsewhere. But then what do you do with it? Gibbs-White up to like Fernandes or Odegaard? Maybe just up to Eze or Mbeumo and then spend that money on defence? I think Haaland drafts are still good, but there's way more decisions to be made and it's not as easy to put together. But I think from a captaincy point of view, it does give you peace of mind. Because you can captain Saka in 3, or Haaland in 3, Haaland in 4 against Brentford at home. Game Week 5 is tricky without Salah because Haaland's got Arsenal at home. But if we have a quick look, let me just have a quick look. I haven't thought about Game Week 5. What other options could you go for? Who's Palmer got? Palmer's got West Ham away, so you could go for him instead. Obviously, Saka's away to Man City, so you wouldn't go for him. And there's no Liverpool attacking cover, which is a little bit of a worry. So yeah, you're probably stuck with Palmer or just going for Haaland. But from 6 onwards, you've got Newcastle away, Fulham at home, Wolves away, Southampton home. So you can captain Haaland most weeks apart from possibly Game Week 5. But if you went for him that week, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So I think Salah and Haaland drafts can both work. But I would go for one or the other. I think I prefer the Salah draft overall. It just depends whether you can cope with the captaincy from game week 6 onwards, and that is what would worry me about not having Haaland. He's just such an easy option to fall back on for that captaincy. But I just have a feeling the overall squad will do better. And that's what we've seen in the first couple of game weeks. Yes, Haaland did really well in game week 2, but plenty of people with Salah only did well as long as they had the rest of the picks that did decently too. But that's the nice thing about captaincy. If you nail it, you don't necessarily have to worry so much about everyone else. It's a tricky one. I think when I wildcard in game week 6, I will probably go Haaland only. But if I was going right now, given the fixtures that Liverpool have in game weeks 4 and 5, and what you can do with the rest of the squad, I think I'd probably go Salah and have a plan to bring Haaland back in later. But it's really close. And again, we've got to say FPL have nailed the pricing. There's genuine decisions to be made. There's more than one way to play it. And there's going to be plenty of swings over the next few game weeks. Let me know in the comments below if you're wildcarding, or if you were wildcarding, how would you set up? Haaland only, Salah only, both, or neither? If you've enjoyed it, give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Rate 5 stars if you listen on podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with transfer tips.